Jim Dandy here with a special treat for you. This book I bought, one of the best books I ever bought. It's called Domestic Medicine. It's 600 pages long by Dr. William Buchman. And he talks about why kids die their first year of life and the conditions of health, or rather the conditions of filth in this country, England. And the book was written in 1792. Take a look and listen to it because you're going to love it. This book is by a very popular medical doctor. He believed in generous vaccination and in some cases giving drugs. But when you hear what he has to say, you would think he was a healthologist. I think that's a word I coined about 25 years ago, healthologist. It's not in the dictionary. But his advice could be a blueprint for being healthy in today's world. The interesting thing about it is this book is called Domestic Medicine, or a treatise on the prevention and cure of diseases, by William Buchan, B-U-C-H-A-N, M.D., Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians in Edinburgh, in England, I believe that is. It's a 12th edition. It was written, are you ready for this? In 1792. I'm just going to read a few paragraphs and sentences out of the book. It's about a 600-page book. It's just really one of the best books I've ever read. But on page 214, under the heading of the smallpox, the doctor says, children are most liable to this disease, and those whose food is unwholesome, who want proper exercise, and abound with gross humors, run the greatest hazard from it. End of quote. He's telling you this is a nutritional filth disease. This is a man who was there. This isn't somebody coming out of college, 25 years old, who never saw a case of smallpox in his life. On the preface, page X, the doctor says, it appears from the annual registers of the dead that almost one half of the children born in Great Britain die under 12 years of age, that almost one half of the human species perishes in infancy by improper management or neglect. Doesn't sound like any germ theory, does it, folks? He says no one who has not had any opportunity of observing them can imagine what absurd and ridiculous practices still prevail in the nursing and management of infants, and what numbers of lives are by that means lost to society. He says a number of unnecessary and destructive articles have been introduced into the diet, clothing of infants, that it's no wonder so many of them die. One great source of the diseases of children is the unhealthiness of parents. A delicate female brought up within doors, an utter stranger to exercise and open air, who lives on tea and other slops, may bring a child into the world, but it will hardly be fit to live. Deformity of body may indeed proceed from weakness or disease, but in general, it is the effect of improper clothing. 9/10 at least of the deformity among mankind must be imputed to this cause. Whoever considers these things will not be surprised that so many children die of convulsions soon after the birth. I have known a child seized with convulsion fits soon after the midwife had done swaddling it, who upon taking off the rollers and bandages was immediately relieved and never had the disease afterwards. Dirty clothes not only gall and fret the tender skins of infants, but likewise occasion ill smells, and what is worse, tend to produce vermin and coldness diseases. This is, he's telling you it was the behavior and living standards of these people that caused these diseases and not any germs or bugs. The doctor goes on to say, it is strange how people came to think that the first thing given to a child should be drugs. Midwives have improved upon this and never fail to give syrups, oils, whether they are necessary or not. Cramming an infant with such indigestible stuff as soon as it is born can hardly fail to make it sick and is more likely to occasion diseases than to prevent them. Upon the first sight of an infant, almost every person is struck with the idea of its being weak, feeble, and wanting support. This naturally suggests the need of cordials. Accordingly, wines are universally mixed with the first food of children. Few things prove more hurtful to infants than the common method of sweetening their food. It entices them to take more than they ought to do, which makes them grow fat and bloated. Their excesses are entirely owing to nurses. All strong liquors are hurtful to children. Some parents teach their children to guzzle ale and other fermented liquors at every meal. These children seldom escape the violence of smallpox, measles, whooping cough, or some inflammatory disorder. Reread that one twice, or listen to that one twice. In fact, I'm going to repeat that. Few things prove more hurtful to infants than the common method of sweetening their food. It entices them to take more than they ought to do, which makes them grow fat and bloated. Their excesses are entirely owing to nurses. All strong liquors are hurtful to children. Some parents teach their children to guzzle ale and other fermented liquors at every meal. These children seldom escape the violence of the smallpox, measles, whooping cough, or some inflammatory disorder. Of all the causes which conspire to render the life of man short and miserable, none has greater influence than the want of proper exercise. Healthy parents, wholesome food, and proper clothing will avail little where exercise is neglected. Were this principle attended to, many diseases might be prevented. Few things prove more destructive to children than confined or unwholesome air. This is one reason why so few of those infants who are put into hospitals or parish workhouses live. Want of wholesome air is likewise destructive to many of the children born in great towns. There the poor sort of inhabitants live in low, dirty, confined houses, to which the fresh air has hardly any access. Without entering into detail of this particular advantages of wholesome air to children, or of the bad consequences which proceed from the want of it, I shall only observe that of several thousands of children which have been under my care, I do not remember one instance of a single child who continued healthy in a closed, confined situation, but have known the most obstinate diseases cured by removing them from such situation to an open, free air. And you see, folks, we were told that we're living longer because of the medical profession and their drugs instead of cleaner hygiene and sanitation. This is the truth here. Chapter of nurses. Though it admits of some exceptions, yet we may lay it down as a general rule that every woman who nurses for hire should be carefully looked after. Otherwise, she will not do her duty. One of the most common faults of those who nurse for hire is to dose children with stupefactives or such things as lull them to sleep. An indolent nurse who does not give a child sufficient exercise in the open air to make it sleep and does not choose to be disturbed by it in the night will seldom fail to procure for it a dose of laudanum, diacotum, saffron, or whatever drug answers the purpose, a dose of spirits or other strong liquors. Can you imagine giving liquor to these babies? These, though they may be certain poison to infants, are every day administered by many who bear the character of very good nurses. Children are often hurt by nurses suffering them to cry long and vehemently. There strains their tender bodies and frequently occasions ruptures, inflammation of the throat, lungs, etc. Nurses who deal in medicine are always to be suspected. Such nurses imagine that a dose of medicine will make up for all the defects in food, air, exercise, and cleanliness. Nature often attempts to free the bodies of children from bad humors by throwing them upon the skin. By this means, fevers and other diseases are prevented. Nurses are apt to mistake such critical eruptions for an itch or some other infectious disorder. Accordingly, they take every method to drive them in. In this way, many children lose their lives, and no wonder, as nature is opposed in the very method she takes to relieve them. On page 62, he says of ailment. Unwholesome food and irregularities in diet occasion many diseases. There is no doubt but the whole constitution of body may be changed by diet alone. It's an amazing statement, folks. Page 64, he says it's a common practice, however, in some grazing countries for servants and poor people to eat such animals as die of any disease. My comment, that's what they feed us today on these cows, isn't it? Diseased animals, pink slime. No animal can be wholesome which does not take sufficient exercise. It's like dairy products. I just saw a video the other day on how they herd these animals to the point where they're so weak they can't even walk. He goes on, most of our stalled cattle are crammed with gross food, but not allowed exercise nor free air. Butchers render meat unwholesome with the abominable custom of filling the cellular membranes of animals with air in order to make them appear fat, is every day practiced. I wonder if they do that today. This not only spoils the meat and renders it unfit for keeping, but is such a dirty trick. On page 76, he talks about the air. In great cities, so many things tend to contaminate the air that it is no wonder it proves so fatal to the inhabitants. The air in cities is not only breathed repeatedly over, but it is likewise loaded with sulfur, smoke, and other exhalations, beside the vapors continually arising from innumerable putrid substances such as dunghills, slaughterhouses, etc. Page 80. The notion that sick people must be kept very hot is so common that one can hardly enter the chamber where a patient lies without being ready to faint by reason of the hot, suffocating smell. You know, I've always told you that medical science was founded in ignorance, and it still remains today, except today it's a bit more cold-blooded. Chapter 100 of Cleanliness. Diseases of the skin are chiefly owing to want of cleanliness. One common cause of putrid and malignant fevers is a want of cleanliness. These fevers commonly begin among the inhabitants of closed, dirty houses who breathe unwholesome air, take little exercise, and wear dirty clothes. Page 101. In many great towns, the streets are little better than dunghills, being frequently covered with ashes, dung, and nastiness of every kind. Even slaughterhouses are often seen in the very center of towns. The putrid blood, excrements, etc., with which these places are generally covered, cannot fail to taint the air and render it unwholesome. Page 136. Fear, anxiety, and a fretful temper both occasion and aggravate diseases. I'm going to read that again because today I think with the way the medical profession intimidates and uses fear on people, I think that's a cause of half of their problems. It says fear, anxiety, and a fretful temper both occasion and aggravate diseases. In vain do we apply medicines to the body to remove maladies which proceed from the mind. Those who breathe the impure air of cities have many maladies to which the more happy rustics are entire strangers. Persons who feed grossly and indulge in strong liquors are liable to diseases which do not affect the temperate and abstemious. Page 309, Dr. Buchman says, I have been twice brought to the gates of death by this disease. And he circles cholera morbus. And both times it was occasioned by eating rancid bacon. Now there's an honest man for you, I'll tell you. That's exactly what causes a lot of disease, particularly in restaurants, by the way. It's not germs and viruses as they lie to you about. It's all about spoiled food. The observations concerning diet, air, exercise, etc. are more of a general nature and have not escaped the attention of physicians in any age. The man who pays a proper attention to these will seldom need the physician, and he who does not will seldom enjoy health. Let him enjoy as many physicians as he pleases. Unwholesome food and irregularities in diet occasion many diseases. There is no doubt but the whole constitution of body may be changed by diet alone. A very small attention to these things will be sufficient to show how much the preservation of health depends upon a proper regimen of the diet. The most obstinate scurvy has often been cured by a vegetable diet. As many of the indications of cure may be answered by diet alone, it is always the first thing to be attended to in the treatment of disease. I'm going to read that again. As many of the indications of cure may be answered by diet alone, it is always the first thing to be attended to in the treatment of disease. A diet consisting chiefly of milk will not only support the patient, but will often cure the disease after every medicine has failed. Of course, today's milk is a different story unless you're getting raw or almond milk. The patient will receive more benefit from having the fresh air prudently admitted into his chamber than from all the medicines which can be given him. I love this guy. He's as honest as they come. Exercise may likewise in many cases be considered as a medicine. Sailing or riding on horseback, for example, will be more of service in the cure of consumptions, glandular obstruction, etc. than any medicine yet known. Few things are of greater importance in the cure of diseases than cleanliness. Many diseases are cured by cleanliness alone. Most of them may be mitigated by it. The most general causes of fevers are infection, errors in diet, unwholesome air, violent emotions of the mind, and extreme degrees of heat and cold. I'm thinking, I wonder if the Rockefellers would have been around at that time if they'd have called him a quack. And he was one of the most popular doctors in England. He says, a fever is only an effort of nature to free herself from an offending cause. That is so important. A fever is only an effort of nature to free herself from an offending cause. This is a very prominent medical doctor telling you this. You do not want to take things that interfere or suppress the fever. This is what is helping you to get better. Our bodies are so framed as to have a constant tendency to expel or throw off whatever is injurious to health. This is generally done by urine, sweat, stool, expectoration, vomit, or some other evacuation. Much solid food is in a fever, is every way hurtful. In other words, don't eat when you're sick. It oppresses nature, and instead of nourishing the patient, serves only to feed the disease. Gotta read that again. Much solid food in a fever is every way hurtful. It oppresses nature, and instead of nourishing the patient, serves only to feed the disease. The first thing to be done in the cure of an intermitting fever is to cleanse the stomach and bowels. Vomits are therefore to be administered before the patient takes any other medicine. Now, I wished you could read this book. In fact, I think about a year ago I looked this up on used books or new books or something. I think they actually reproduced this book. It's one of the best books there is, really. I mean, the guy believes in Jenner and his inoculation and throws that in, which is contrary to what he's saying, what I just read. And he gives, some whiskey and different kind of drugs. But he is so smart about the causes of health and disease, talking about the real conditions of disease with cleanliness and sanitation and filth and air and exercise, and explaining to you how the conditions were in those days back in the 1700s and the 1800s. And it's interesting when he says vomits are therefore to be administered before the patient takes any other medicine, because I read a pro-doctor book just early this morning where the man said in cases of smallpox, he said you don't want to give them, you don't want the people to vomit, you don't want to give them anything to vomit because it interferes with the drugs. Now, this is how backward and ass backward these people are. They give a person a drug, the body recognizes it as a poison and kicks it out by vomiting, gets rid of the drug, and the doctor concludes that somehow the vomiting is bad because it eliminated his cure-all drug. I mean, these people just are not smart when it comes to health. They just really aren't. I may do some more on this book later on. It's just such a wealth of information from 1792. He could have been a good healthologist today in that. But you'll learn a lot from this, so listen to it a few more times and share it with your friends and relatives, neighbors, whoever will listen to you. I try to keep these short so that I can keep your attention. I want to thank you for this, and this is just one of many, many more audio CDs on all the great books and pamphlets that I've collected over the years to share with you folks. Thank you.
And that's the facts for smallpox from a 1792 doctor who knew what was going on. None of this bullshit you get from these people today. You can get my book on Amazon, The Anti-Vaccineer's Bible, or Shots of Truth, Real Science. They're both the same book, but different titles. It's just me, Jim Dandy, exposing medical myths one at a time. This is a good one for you people that are rather new and don't really know what smallpox was all about. But other than that, I will see you in the next CD video.